is because I like to stick lyrics on the front of presentations, just kind of things that are meaningful while I'm writing them. And I stuck these lyrics on my prezo that I gave earlier in the year. And I didn't realize the irony until I was prepping for today. And I looked at it and I said, there's a whole lot of crap that went on after the talk. It turns out New York Times made an article that got a whole bunch of people up in a tizzy because they didn't see the talk, but the New York Times, they made emotions, right? That's what news people do. So this talk seemed, or this slide seemed particularly pertinent. Turn that back on. But that's not the reason for the talk. If you came to the talk, hopefully, you were expecting to see attacking SCADA for fun and profit. GrrCON style. You're not here to see my dancing either, I see. A little bit about me. I've been breaking things for about 10 years. Actually, since I was a child, but I've been breaking IT things for about 10 years. I am a father and a husband. Those are the top priorities in this world. And I seem to be slightly addicted to electricity. Turns out the idea of power going out for me is rather treacherous since both my hobbies and my work depend on it. I like to break apart binaries, tear them apart, make sense of them, maybe do other interesting things than what they were intended. And I like doing that with hardware as well. Some of you may have seen some of the other talks that I've given on SCADA over wireless. Probably about 20 years ago, 20, 25 years ago, correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody knows. Utility industry, power, water, okay, critical infrastructure. Think critical infrastructure. Power, water, sewage, and anything else that seems pretty important to life. Realized that they were having these recurring costs. You see, a lot of utilities have to have substations set out in geographically dispersed locations. And they had lease lines to communicate with them. Now these lease lines cost. Whereas if you set up a proper wireless network, you can recover those costs, maybe chunk down some capital budget and reduce your overall operating budget. Am I speaking somebody's terms? I know I'm speaking yours. Yeah. Paul's hacked management. You guys know Paul Nelson up here? He's hacked management. This is a guy who goes way back in hacking. In so doing, this was Wild West time, and still is, in the wireless industry, where you get a myriad of everything. Mostly, it started off as proprietary wireless. Hey, we got this amazing thing. It's going to make your substations be just a click away, and you don't have to pay the recurring fees. Oftentimes, the technologies for this fell into the ISM band sub-gigahertz range. So anything below a gigahertz or 1,000 megahertz. either NDA the snot out of them and tell them what it is, in a way around it, or plug them direct in past the obscurity, because all you're doing is wasting your own money at that. I also want to say this. Many things that go on in a substation, particularly power, have a mandated, regulatorily mandated minimum or maximum time frame for reaction. This type of transaction does not go over wireless communications mostly. A couple radios that are common throughout the power grid and other critical infrastructure. I didn't choose these necessarily for any particular reason, except that they were ones that I knew. They were ones that other people had seen, and they were easy to Google. So Raven X provides some cool stuff based on cellular technology. Your eBridge, or your Silver Spring networks, they provide an eBridge and an S-bridge, which tries to do bump-on-the-wire wireless mesh. And they also use this mesh for other things like their advanced metering infrastructure. XtendRF is made by Digi. And basically, they've also continued the bump-on-the-wire approach with simply, you plug in a serial port here, there's a serial port on the other end. You don't have to know the details. SpeedNet, d00m, using sub-gigahertz wireless. Who here's ever heard of RFCAT? Some of you? Good. You guys will obviously know why I'm pointing at the sub-gigahertz proprietary stuff, because RFCAT currently focuses on that range, and I made RFCAT. So that doesn't make it great, it just means that that's where I'm focused. And Syseco also makes out a couple different series of wireless comms. They are SRF, URF, and XRF. I know it spells sucks, RF, but I didn't really mean that until I got up here and saw it. Raven X, just a little background, won't spend too much time, provides an Ethernet 10100 jack on both ends, and your serial DB9 on both ends, and you don't have to know the details, they just communicate. They do use IPsec for secure tunneling. I will not comment on whether they go well. Silver Spring eBridge and S-bridge. These guys use sub-gigahertz. Yay! They have a couple different options. One serial, one Ethernet gets you an eBridge because it's got a third net jack. Two serials get you an S-bridge. They range from 2400 to 115 kilobaud, which doesn't seem very fast by internet technology standards, but it is actually pretty good for a serial port. They include an embedded firewall, IPsec tunneling, and DMP3 over IP. You guys familiar with DMP3, some of you? It's a well-known standard for utility communications. These guys look really good on a sales slick. The thing that concerned me was where the sales slick went and said pseudo-random frequency hopping sequencing. Silver Spring's per-device hopping sequence is a method long used for secure military communications. I can say that these guys have done some really amazing work, but they're no military communications team. I'll get a little bit into that as a technology, not against them later, because others seem to think the same thing. Digi has their XtendRF. I have a couple of these at home. I actually have slides that were made by Don Weber, Mr. Cutaway, if any of you know him. He gave this talk, and he rewrote it because he wasn't very happy with some of the stuff some of the focus because of some of his job requirements. So he rewrote this using the XtendRF. I almost included those slides, but I only have 50 minutes. Sorry. These guys have their serial bump-on-the-wire approach. They can go up to 40 miles. It's pretty incredible. I mean, WiMAX is what? 30-something? They use 256-bit AES encryption. There's a rubber stamp that actually says that, I swear, somewhere. How well they implement it, I have no idea. And they offer 10-hole unique hopping patterns. This is where the radio chooses a radio frequency, transmits or receives, hops to a different one, hops to a different one, hops to a different one. look at all this, either you've got a customer with very big pockets, and they like you, because those two don't always have to agree. You will be focused on too much and get nothing done. Or, the ideal case, you set things appropriately. You do fairly deep, good technical work, and then they have you back for the next chunk. A couple different ways into attacking this type of communication. Hop the fence into a substation. Oftentimes, you'll find gear that is Ethernet connected into whatever backhaul they've got. Sometimes it's lease line, sometimes it's wireless, sometimes it's cellular, whatever. If you have an Ethernet jack, either DHCP or whatever, I mean, who can't get in between some Ethernet traffic and, my Linux laptop makes a great bridge. So get in the way, sniff the traffic, maybe become a node on the network, and you've got a direct line back to a utility of some sort. At this point, it doesn't really matter if it's wireless, so I hate to make the whole non-wireless aspect, but hey, the wireless aspect, you skip all the security in the wireless system. I'd like to point out, if you are a utility and you have substations that have a direct backhaul, which everybody who has a substation generally does, they are untrusted environments. You had better be putting in security measures at every connection back into your network, and not just allow me to go say, hey there, Active Directory, how you doing, from within the substation. Pole-top devices are my favorite, actually, because pole-top devices have a lot of the same stuff that your substation does, but nobody's watching them as closely. Nobody can afford to put a video camera against everything sitting on a pole. And any pole that has an antenna off it is very interesting to me. I also like the fact that at 2 a.m., I can climb almost any pole, or at least I can find a pole that I can climb, take whatever off I want, or even just jack in. Heck, if I get the right gear, I show up with a ladder, or I climb the pole, if I got the pegs coming out, I strap in, I just hook in my laptop, and I'm going. As I was sharing this one with a buddy who's done a ton of utility work in security, he said, those things are battery powered, you can just shoot them off. Like, shoot them off? He said, yeah, a shotgun's not going to actually penetrate the box, but it will take it off in many occasions. You can shoot it off, you got 24 hours of battery to go do whatever you want. Wow, thanks. Now, I prefer the RF hacking side, but I will say that the grabbing a pole-top device or grabbing a device makes RF hacking a lot easier because I get to learn more about the system. In case you didn't know, I'll say it now, this is a bouncing along, meter deep, and then we deep dive for a little while, and then we bounce along for another meter deep for a little bit, trying to wrap it up. So watch for RF hacking in the deep dive in just a couple minutes. If I'm doing RF hacking, what am I interested in? One of the ways that I can attack a device is by creating an attack radio. Something that takes part in the mesh network or whatever thing that I'm on, somehow get me onto the network so I can get past any security things that they've got in place for the wireless, and I get to the actual stuff on the other end of the wireless. So I do radio analysis. actually very similar to that, because by providing the wireless marks, by providing the underlying wireless, there are many things that are assumed to be magical in the wireless. That ring a bell with anybody in here? How about WEP? Anybody cracked WEP in here? Okay. WEP was assumed to be good enough, right? You had this magical thing. I turn on my laptop, and I repurposing the hardware, already discussed a little bit of that. And using what's already there, already discussed. I write slides thinking, how should I talk about this? And then I talk about it and think, how should I have written that slide? But oh well. So a little bit about the effectiveness of current security measures, including a nifty little deep dive. Spread spectrum. Many people still consider frequency hopping of a unknown pseudo-random pattern to be a high security measure. Not quite so. Proprietary crypto. Yay! That worked really well. WEP is a perfect example of proprietary crypto. They took a very strong algorithm, they modified it slightly. We'll just change that. It'll make discovery easier. Boom. We have WEP. Proprietary modulation. Critical infrastructure geeks are geeks and wonderful, and oftentimes they are brilliantly smart. In fact, sometimes too smart for their own good. Some of them have come up with their own proprietary modulation scheme. So we talk about FSK or FM for the digital world. There's also ASK, which is AM for the digital world. PSK, phase shift, and a couple others that are just well known. They're well known, they're well used. But since they're well known, they're well used, nobody assumes that there's real security in them. But if you create your own, then only your radio will be able to talk about it in a minute. And reusing technology. 3G is a perfect example. We've got WiMAX, we've got a few other things in the field. Talk about that in a minute. The funniest, to this day, comment about security that I have ever heard was at a power utility conference where the sales guy, who knew a little bit of tech, he was a sales tech, said, our FHSS is too fast for hackers to hack. I wish I crashed that car. I probably would have listed his name. Show of hands, who understands why that's stupid? Those of you who aren't quite sure, in a few minutes, hopefully you will. Commercial grade FHSS, they like to say, military grade, military use, we do the same thing. Anybody seen Labyrinth? Labyrinth is a movie that I'm actually embarrassed to say that I know very well, but I just feel like you're walking through these tunnels and there are stone figures talking to you going, go back the other way! Doom awaits you! What are they saying when they say military grade? They're saying, don't worry about it, I got that. What don't they got? They don't got a use case that allows for the type of protections that the military actually uses when they do frequency hopping. They have networks that need to dynamically allow new nodes to discover and partake in the network. Hello? Commercial grade. This is not the same. Hopping patterns can be determined in a number of ways. Reverse engineering. Yay! That generic term, sorry for it. Patents and FCC documents often will list not only any patterns that are in use, but oftentimes, because the people who came up with the technology are so proud of it, they say, this is the way it's done, baby. Watch. And they show you in algorithms how to determine, based on blah, how to talk to this piece of network here. Reverse engineering? Hey, I think patents and FCC documents are a part of the reverse engineering process. Absolutely. Radio frequency analysis. This can get you into a little bit of trouble if you're not careful. Because radio frequency analysis, you can watch using a spectrum analyzer, you can see how two devices are talking and utilizing the spectrum. Don't be fooled. Many of the mesh networks that are dynamic create hopping patterns based on something that if you go to the other side of the city, the hopping pattern would be different. Sometimes even in the same network, to talk to a different device, you have a FET can help dump firmware. This vendor in particular had no protections on their chip. In fact, the chip that they chose has no ability to protect the firmware that they have. Soleo logic analyzer to sit between the bus and the microcontroller. I highly recommend them if you've got a budget at all. There are better tools out there, but they will cost your arm, possibly a big toe. RFCAD packet dump. This helps with verifying that what we're doing is working, validate what's going on, and then firmware analysis. Here's the good FET. Woo! A few things removed to protect the innocent. Because of the chip, the good FET is actually fairly simple to use. Using this command dump. This is the file name that you're dumping into, and then grab some memory and it'll dump it in there in INX fashion. Bus sniffing. This is probably the most costly part of the whole thing. Each one of these micro grippers costs $40 a piece. There's 6 on there. That's $240. They come in sets of 10. I'll let you do that math. Tap the bus between the microcontroller and the radio because, little spoiler here, the design of hardware is such that you want it to be easy to connect devices. And so you get bus lines that do pretty much the same thing using a typically somewhat standardized bus protocol that you can learn and you can manipulate, you can capture, and you can generate traffic. Logic Analyzer lets us figure out how RX and TX work. Here's a big picture of a Soleo dump between a microcontroller and a radio. You'll notice the 3 lines at the top are an SPI bus that configures the radio, and the 2 lines at the bottom are a proprietary one-wire communication protocol that is based on the chip. This particular chip is an ADF7020, and it has a couple quirks about it and a data sheet that tells all about them. Here's a little bit bigger capture. You'll notice at the very beginning, there's this configuration, and then the radio wires go wild. Let's dig deeper into the configuration pin information. Here's the 3 pins for an SPI bus. There's the enable pin, and then there's the TX and RX pins. So it's a synchronous protocol where you turn on the enable, and then you ratchet in bits, and the thing's ratcheting bits back at you if it has anything to say. And the protocol, how the protocol works, has to determine who gets to talk when. And that's proprietary input. So our second line is the clock line. If you've done anything like this, you'll notice there are large gaps in the clock line. I don't like that, but we'll talk about it in a minute. And the third line is our data. Data pins. Here's the big picture. I jumped ahead. Here's actually where the clock pins scare me. You'll notice that the clock pin for the data has gaps. And to figure out how that works, what it does, if you look into what this all does, and you read the 7020 documentation, this will make sense. I'll tell you in a minute. The second shot is zoomed in, and you'll notice these gaps indicate, actually, after reading and analyzing, these gaps identify when the device is transmitting. Many radios, let me back up, many radio chips will handle a lot of data, a lot of the details for you, including, like, you just send it a packet of stuff, and it logic analyzer, dump out the raw bits using a custom Python script, the data sheet, and some time. I figured out how the configuration went, and based on that configuration, then I have to interpret all the lines that way. So I figured out how to switch between channels, and I was able to see where they changed from RX to TX. So when I get to a TX, then I know to go down to that data bin and convert it to actual bytes. The first time didn't really go very well. F3A0 wasn't in there. So I shifted it left 2 bits. Why? Because I didn't want to lose data off the right side. That gave me 862F. Still not there yet. However, when I decided to invert the bits, because this is not an uncommon thing to happen in radio, I ended up with 5555. Well, gee, AA is a better representation of a preamble, so I don't like this. Let's shift it 1 more bit. Boom, F3A0. So I got something. He's going to throw me off here. You may actually have to protect me. Taking the configuration information that we discovered by just dumping the config lines, I plugged that into RFCAT, and I received this packet. Now, something dumped earlier was this packet off of the Solea dump. 44001F. Oh, wow. That lines up pretty well right after the sync word, except for 2 different spots. Now, when doing analysis, you want to make sure that your baud rate is correct and you aren't like dwindling off and getting out of sync as you go. But because they resync in the middle, I believe that these are just 2 32-bit numbers that change for every packet set that is going on. This is how you read patents with a multicolored pen, a highlighter. You jot notes. Okay, here's something that's kind of interesting. Write questions to yourself. Answer them. Patents can be really amazing things. It's actually kind of pretty. I should put this in for artwork. Analysis of firmware, I will go into figure out what you want to know. Figure out the starting points that you can identify. For example, interrupts are great. Interrupts tell you what happens when things occur. That's a good starting point. Find strings. Find out where stuff is referencing strings. Those help as well. Proprietary crypto. Crypto is hard. Don't make your own. Don't change something and break somebody else's. Don't make proprietary modulation because HackRF or Blade RF, they will make mincemeat of you. USRP in the old days for $2 grand, they make mincemeat of you. They will dump the actual waveforms. You can figure out how they're modulating based on those waveforms. Not a big deal. Reusing technology, make sure you reuse it well. What can we do about it all? Too many. Manufacturers, get with the game. Some of you have, most of you haven't. Provide strong crypto, provide manageability, provide upgrade ease. These devices that are sitting in the field for 30 years, they might want to be updatable. You might want to have a lab where you can test the update before you go live. Just a little bit of a hint there. Provide third-party validation assurance. Work with somebody who's good. Work well with security researchers. Play nice. They'll benefit you. Go hack yourselves. Don't be a douche. Owners and operators, it's your responsibility to make sure they did it well. And then to craft an architecture that makes sure that even if they didn't, you're okay. Don't expect your substations to be protected. Strong security posture. Third-party validation. Don't use IBM or HP. I love IBM and HP. Dell. The service groups in these businesses, for example, IBM charges $1,000 for a PCI pen test. What? I used to charge $50 for my own very small ones. response procedures, get tabletop exercises. Sit down. This thing breaks. Make sure that you're all set for that. Have people respond. Forensics. Think about forensics. Yes, these devices are in the field. They're scary. I don't know how to do forensics on them. Figure it out. Talk to somebody. The people on the previous page, they probably know. Security architecture reviews. Plug in the people who know to the people who have the power to make changes. Don't be a chicken little. The thing that Kevin was mentioning, where the people at the bottom aren't listened to, it's oftentimes because the people at the bottom say too much. If you reserve what you're willing to say for the times when it's important, your opinion will matter more. Maybe not as much as consultants that are paid less money. Speak in their language.